when I learned where he was from, because I knew he had an accent, right? I didn't know. Once again, I don't really know Israel.
Mm-hmm.
When he told me where he's from, Ladero and Danielle, I immediately tried to proselytize him. No one had ever taught me that. That was not my church experience. When you meet a Jew, you get a Bible and you throw it. No, this was my own little immature Christian arrogance type of thing. We're literally in class the next day. I bring my Bible.
Welcome to Talk Jewish to Me, brought to you by Aish, which is the show that discusses important issues like Jewish identity, spiritual growth, raising a Jewish family, and more. We are your hosts, Ladero and Danielle Hart, and we're so excited to have you here.
If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe and like this video on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. And let us know what you think about the episode in the comments. So whether you're a returning listener or a first-time listener, we want to thank you for joining us.
Pastor Dumisani Washington is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, the IBSI, which strengthens the relationship between Israel and people of African descent through education and advocacy. Dumisani is a pastor, professional musician who graduated from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and an author whose latest book is the second edition of Zionism and the Black Church, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. This is going to be an incredible conversation. You guys are in for a treat.
So without further ado, Dumisani Washington.
Welcome to our show. We're so happy to be able to have this moment with you.
Yes.
Ladero and Danielle, it's nice to meet you all formally. I can't say face to face, it's virtual, but still nice to meet you all. Been following you a little bit on social media, so it's great to be with you today.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. So, I mean, we just got done going through this incredible bio of yours. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on for days. A very, very, interesting line of work that you're in. I think maybe we should just start there. Let's kind of just start a little bit about how your journey began. And then I think from here, we can just really just go into a lot of cool things.
Sure. Yeah. So, a lot of different strands. I always think of the quickest, fastest way. Cause among other things, I'm a pastor. So like me and my rabbi friends, we can talk a lot. So I try to whittle it down. So, I was raised Christian, from a very young age. I was pretty serious, religious, spiritually, everything as a little kid, didn't really understand, right? So I'd read my Bible and everything. And I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I was born in the segregated South in the late 1960s, but we grew up in California, right? So I'm not even a year old, and my whole family moved to San Francisco, literally from Little Rock to San Francisco, right? So my first memories of, what's that?
No, I said big change.
Yeah, big change. Well, as a baby, I'm only aware of San Francisco. I know of Little Rock from my parents, right? We travel every once in a while, family reunions, maybe one of the matriarchs or patriarchs passed away, that type of thing. But Ladero and Danielle was raised very proud of my Black American heritage, right? My mom talked about the high school she came from, the segregated high school. And as I tell people all the time, it wasn't a victim conversation. It was we talked about what happened, right? But their main focus was what we did, not what was done to us. The schools, the graduating, the professionals, all of these types of things, right? So I grew up very proud of that heritage. And we are members of King Solomon Baptist Church. So my parents were very involved in church. My dad, a deacon, my mom, a matron board, the whole thing, right?
Wow.
And so I'm a musician. So they knew that as a baby, because I would my mom sat in the front, right? This is back old school, almost like a synagogue with guys on one side, the ladies on the other side.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Singing, I'm rocking.
Yep.
And I'm cool until the pastor gets up, right? As soon as he gets up to preach, I start screaming at the top of my lungs, right? So I'm a baby. I don't really know what's going on. I gave him a complex, my mom said. I wasn't trying to, right? And they figured I liked the music so much, the music stopped, right? I wanted to hear that. That was kind of my upbringing. There was no political Zionism, right? There wasn't anything discussion about the state of Israel or about the Palestinian conflict. It was spiritual Zionism, right? Negro spirituals, the preaching, the teaching, and everything. And so when I would read my Bible, I would read the Old Testament more than the New Testament, right? As a little kid, I didn't know, right? I read the Gospels and everything, but I knew the patriarchs in those stories.
That's so
as a
rare.
little kid. By the time I'm in elementary school, yes, sir.
Yeah, that's so rare. I'm sorry. Keep going. I just had to say.
Yeah, that it was just these things didn't make sense at the time, right? It just at the time I'm just kind of I'm a little kid. I don't really know what's going on. It was 1984. I was a senior in high school when I was first in any way introduced to the modern state of Israel, right? I didn't know anything about Israel, Middle East, nothing. But
Yeah.
1984, November of 1984 was Operation Moses, right? When the Israeli
Mhm.
government secretly airlifts the Ethiopian Jews, begins to bring them home after millennia of being away. I didn't know anything about the modern state of Israel, Ethiopian Jews, Jewish diaspora, nothing, right? All I
Yeah.
knew is I
Yeah.
was on my way out to play ball with my friends. My mom was watching TV. So for those of you who see how old I am, there was no internet, there was no
No
cable,
internet.
right? It was 3 stations: ABC, NBC, CBS, right?
Yes.
So my
Yeah.
mom's watching Peter Jennings' World News Tonight, and I'm on my way out. I turn, it's almost like God takes my face in his hands, turns me to the TV, and I see two main pictures. I see an Ethiopian woman with her child wrapped around her, and I see an elder Ethiopian Jewish man kissing the ground at Ben Gurion Airport. I have no idea what I'm looking at. It's emblazoned in my mind, right? But it's like a picture, boom. Don't know what it is. It's not till years later when I begin to kind of do some research, start to kind of do some reading, finding out, going to the library. Once again, internet's not really a thing. So you got to go old school library, old
That's
school
right.
VHS tapes, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I began to become just more and more fascinated with the diaspora, the Ethiopian Jews, later on the Igbo of West Africa, the East Indian Jews, all of these types of things. These things fascinate me as a biblical narrative, right? Literally the four corners of the earth, the Jewish people returning. And that was kind of my beginning of my road to Zionism, if you will.
That's very, very interesting because that's rare. Like you were saying, like my husband kind of he interrupted a little bit, but just mentioned no, but he mentioned I know because we were in awe of what you just mentioned because it is rare to see somebody really studying, especially of a Christian background, to study the the Old Testament, and for you to go deeper into that and to study that. I know you said you saw Operation Moses and that really intrigued you. What do you think about that was so intriguing, and what did your family think about that at
Yeah.
that time?
What's funny, Danielle, is that I didn't say, in as much as was that 40 years ago now, that's how I know I'm getting older, right? I didn't say anything, right? I never discussed it. It was a situation where I'm watching it. In retrospect, I recognize the significance of it, right? But in
Yeah.
the moment, it was like, I felt it. Right? I was telling the rabbi I was talking about it before. I felt it in my soul, but my brain had no idea what was going on. Right, so my brain was not engaged, so because I couldn't connect it to anything. I couldn't point to Zephaniah 3 from the beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. See, I didn't know those scriptures to like make those connections, but something was going on on a very deeply emotional and spiritual part of me. Later on, I began to understand and a real love for and a connection to the Jewish community, right? So for decades now, I've been blessed to have friends, whether religious, secular, whatever, throughout the Jewish diaspora, whether in Israel, whether throughout the United States, and my Mizrahi friends who fled the Iraq, or who experienced the Farhud back in the 1940s and everything. And so it was as if God was preparing my brain and my little world to begin to absorb those things. And he started it in a way I point back to 1984 just because I can vividly remember seeing those pictures. But for my parents, what I can say, both my mother and father passed away. My mom passed away in 2002, my dad in 2012, right? So we're very close family. I'm the youngest of 7 children, right? So close family and everything. And we talked about a lot. What I'm grateful for is that whether I was reading the Old Testament or what I was doing, they never squashed that, right? We were Baptists, we went to church and we preached and I sang, I played at a young age. But as they saw me kind of coming up and whatever things I was doing, if I'm studying the Old Testament or whatever, it wasn't a situation where like, hey, no, you don't do that. What are you doing? They were always just kind of open. So even as my Israel journey began before they passed away, they saw it and they were fine. And I'm just grateful for that, right? For those types of parents who are just kind of watching my journey, kind of praying with me and everything, but they never tried to squash it or anything.
That's
That's
great.
beautiful.
Dumisani, I have to kind of go here a little bit because you're in a very, very unique and interesting position. The role that you're playing right now throughout the world, but specifically within the Black and Jewish communities, I really believe that it's a game-changing moment. But I think you being a Christian pastor with the heart to educate the world about Israel and the Jewish people, this isn't the most common approach, right? And I say that because there are tons of Christian pastors who push an agenda and they try to proselytize to the Jewish people. Have you received any pushback from the Jewish community who may have mistaken your true intent?
Very little. So this is part of the narrative too. So let me back up. So that was my part of my organic journey that I was sharing with you all.
Yeah.
At some point, I have friends who are part of what is the largest Christian pro-Israel organization, Christians United for Israel. And that's my first journey to answer your question, Ladero. So my first trip to Israel ever is 2012. Now, again, I'm loving Israel and anything for a long time, but it's not until I'm in I guess that's my 30s, I get 20s, 30s, 2012. I do my math. I don't math well, right? Something like that. 10 years ago in the 40s. I go to Israel, go to the Western Wall for the first time. All this for the first time for me, and I had a strong sense to do the political / geopolitical work that I do, right? To really do this Black, Jewish, Israel, Africa thing. So coming up in that vein, and through the years, over a decade, my interactions with my Jewish brothers and sisters in terms of the work that I do, the issue of proselytizing, which we talk about a lot, because obviously there are Christians who that is their agenda, right? They find someone Jewish and they want to proselytize them. I've gotten very little pushback with that. Usually when I get anything like that, it's from someone who doesn't already know me. In other words, it may be a Jewish friend who, because of their experiences and because of what they've gone through, they may kind of view me in that light, and I get it, right? I totally get it. But it's rare. Thankfully, over the years within the Jewish community, I have relationships, friendships, and everything, which I cherish. And those people know who I am. So I'll tell you a quick story, right? I'll do this real quick.
Please.
In my book, I wrote a book called Zionism the Black Church, and the second edition came out, of course, in February 2021. And I tell a story. I tell the details of the story in the book. It's one of the most embarrassing stories for me, but it was part of my journey, right? And it's controversial because depending on if you're standing on the Christian or the Jewish side of this, you might feel some kind of way about it, right? But the short version of the story, those of you want to know the whole thing, just get the book, right? The short version of the story is that in my love for Israel and in Hebrew and all those types of things, the patriarchs, all that kind of stuff, was a little kid. I'm in college, and my first known interaction with someone who's Jewish or Israeli is my freshman year in college, right, at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. His name is Ariel. To this day, I don't know where Ariel is. He may be living in Israel now. He may be somewhere else. He's a tuba player. So it's funny because I was a pianist. He's a tuba, a stereotypical kind of big burly guy. Right? And we're talking and we're vibing and everything like that. And no joke, I tell this joke. Tell this story. I was all of 18 years old, right? A long time ago. I'm 56 now, just so folks will know, right? That's how long ago this was, right?
Yeah.
When I learned where he was from, because I knew he had an accent, right? I didn't know. Once again, I don't really know Israel. When he told me where he's from, Ladero and Danielle, I immediately tried to proselytize him. No one had ever taught me that. That was not my church experience. When you meet a Jew, you get a Bible and you throw it. No, this was my own little immature Christian arrogance type of thing. We're literally in class the next day. I bring my Bible.
Yeah.
In the middle of class, the teacher's like, and it's a little school, right? There's only 200 something student body. There's all of maybe even 20 of us in class. So I'm not even like in the back in the cuts, right? Trying to have a conversation.
Sure.
With 40 people. I'm sitting there. I'm turning to the book of John. I'm turning to the book of 1 Corinthians. So any Christians that are listening to this right now, peep this, please. And he's looking at me horrified. He's just looking at me like, what is this dude's problem?
What's happening?
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not even tripping, like going, you're Jewish, Jesus is Jewish. Y'all ought to meet each other, the type of thing. That's my mindset, right? Because I'm all excited because I've met this Israeli Jewish young man. Again, this is all on automatic pilot for me. Of course, it destroys the relationship. Now, he was always the great. You know what he said to me? He asked me, why are you trying to proselytize me? I hadn't even heard the word proselytize before, so I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
And he said, I lived for a semester with 40 Jesuit priests. Wherever he was near wherever he was before he came to school there. None of them ever tried to proselytize me, he said. I was undaunted. I'm doing that whole, so
Wow.
eventually he just kind of distances himself. I don't understand this. Ladero and Danielle, it's not until a few years later when I began to get educated on this thing that was in my heart, but didn't know really what it was, that I realized how much I had offended this friend of mine. How much that even if I wanted to share something about Jesus, even if I was going to do that, to do it in a way that was totally disrespectful to who he was, what his faith was, what the history between the church and the synagogue was, the whole thing. Because I didn't know there was Spanish Inquisition and the Jews persecuted, the Christians persecuted Jews. None of that. I know none of these things completely in my ignorance. Right. I'm trying to change this man's religion, to change his faith, but I don't know that's what I'm doing. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I tell that story in my book, and I tell that story openly. As embarrassing as it was for me as that 18-year-old kid, that was part of the journey. As my life unfolded, I went, oh God, now I see what you were doing. Now I understand. You were showing me where I was in all of my ignorance. My heart may have been in the quote unquote right place, but in all of my ignorance, right? You were showing me where I was. And that became a lot of the foundation of the mutually respectful relationship that I have with my Jewish friends. And even so, whenever I even see Christians do what I did then, I get it, right? And I go, yeah, I remember me. I was like, look, I can't even really be judgmental. I'm like, that was me. That was me back in the 1980s, trying to proselytize my Jewish friend in the middle of class like that and everything, not even respecting who he was, not knowing anything about his faith. Really, that was a real a learning point, a starting point for me. I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah.
Makes total sense. Thank you for sharing that. I really believe that these type of conversations need to be had. I think we need to hear more stories like this consistently. And you said so many beautiful things. I wish we had more time to really dig into some of those different things.
So much time. I didn't mean to do that.
No, please. It's very, very necessary. Very, very necessary for you to just kind of share your experience and just kind of where you are now. And it's beautiful. And I really believe that you're an example to to many people.
Yeah, I mean, just showing that the Christian and Jewish people can coexist together in a way that you're making it happen, and it's very beautiful. Like that. I mean that was our background. We come from a Christian background initially. Obviously, we're going through a conversion process now in Judaism, an Orthodox conversion. But just to hear your maturity behind that, because even within what you realized you did, and even if it was a couple years later, you realized it and said, okay, well, this is something I need to change. And I guess with that said, this is my next question is, why is the relationship between the Israel people and the African descent so important to you?
It's important on many different levels, Danielle, and you all this part of the journey, and I'm doing the Cliff Notes version, right? I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping along with the passion for Israel was also a passion for Africa. This was something that for me, post college, now as a young father, there's this awakening that happens to me, this love for the continent, right? I mean, I literally kind of adopt the nation of Sudan during the whole Darfur region, and there being all the slavery and the genocide and those types of things. So I'm researching these things, I'm following these things. We homeschooled our kids, right? So I taught them all at that point 53 nations and the capitals of all of Africa and everything. We're kind of I'm learning these different things. This is just something that you begin very similar to the Israel Hebrew thing. The Africa part of me just kind of exploded, almost like something just went off inside of my little heart, right? So that's why I said when I went to Israel the first time, 2012, those things married. One of the things that was very significant to me was Africa's role in Israel's life. Israel becomes a nation in Africa, right? Egypt, right? Israel marries Hashem at Sinai, which is in Egypt, right? All this happens in Africa, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're talking about the diaspora, the prophets by name often will mention Misraim and Cush and all these other types of things. These are the types of things that were fascinating to me. But even whether you're talking about the African Jewish diaspora or non-Jews, like the Queen of Sheba, we call that the first Africa-Israel summit when she traveled all the way from Cush to Jerusalem 3,000 years ago and sat with Solomon. There's no other story, as you know, like it in the Bible. No other foreign leader travels to Israel in friendship, bringing even tribute. She brought off. I told people this was ancient. This is not the modern day. She didn't need drip irrigation from Israel. She didn't need water technology, none of that kind of stuff. She did nothing. They didn't. They were very wealthy. She probably had more money than Solomon. In 1 Kings chapter 10, it says she brought 120 talents of gold. That's 4 tons. How wealthy do you have to be to bring 4 tons as just a gift, right? I mean, you talk about
right.
What does she do? She comes there, declares God's love for Israel, right? And we talk about an organization. It's a very, very significant place that God gives Africa. Again, no other nation, every other person or foreign person that comes and marches on Jerusalem is to destroy it, right? I mean, I don't care if it's Babylon, whoever it is, right? So we talked about that. We talk about that as a basis for much of what we do, because that whole Africa-Israel thing gets played out in the United States. Post-slavery, one of the most important relationships is Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington, right? Who build what's called the Rosenwald schools for millions of Black children who have nowhere to go to school. How did this Black man and this Jewish man find each other, right? You kept doing the civil rights movement, Dr. King, Joshua Heschel. Why do you keep seeing these themes of Black and Jewish folk? And again, and for those who listen, we know that Black Jewish folks are Black, white, and brown. We're not saying that the Jews are white and Black folks are Black. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about almost like these tribes of people coming together, right? And changing the world, right? Defining civil rights for the world, defining education for the world. What we teach in our organization, we don't believe those things are happenstance. It's almost like a divine calling, which is why in this modern day, Israel's enemies, more than any other group, seek to exploit Black people. When the Palestine Liberation Organization was formed and Yasser Arafat became the leader, what was the first thing he has on his agenda? To reach out to Black American leaders. Why? Because that synergy there had to be broken. If he was going to have any type of legitimacy, he had to stand next to Black people who represented such a connection to Israel and the Jewish people. And that's one of the main reasons why it's so important to us to preserve what we believe is a divine mandate.
Beautiful. Yeah, I totally agree. You know, when you think about the establishment of the NAACP, you know, like, you know, long before Dr. King was even born, right? It's the oldest civil rights organization in the world, founded by what? Black and Jewish Americans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Ladero, you see it over and over again. Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance was made up of young people, artists, and all kinds of thinking, just amazing minds, many of whom graduated from Rosenwald schools as young people and then got Rosenwald fellowships, right? You had Jewish philanthropic money that had much to do with the formation of some of the HBCUs in terms of Black and Jewish people coming together. You said this tiny minority of people, right? The Jewish people during the time of the Nazi rise, Jews fled and came to the United States, and no schools will allow those professors to teach except for what? HBCUs, right? Here they are coming HBCUs because they recognize we know what it is to be marginalized. We know what it is for you to be kicked out. That famous picture of Albert Einstein in one of the I can't remember which one of the schools it is, somewhere in the Midwest, and all these brothers sitting there, these nice suits. That's how they went to class, right? These suits and ties and everything. And here he is teaching this class. It was an iconic moments showing this synergy again, that over and over again these people would find each other and do great work, not just for their communities but for everybody else around them.
What is it that the Black community is missing then, right? We have all of these Black and Jewish connections, you know, that goes back into history, and it's like now we're at a place where it's just non-existent. You know, there's so much miseducation, misunderstandings. Like where did we go wrong, and like how, I guess, where do we go from it? How do we fix it?
Well, if I just ever so politely push back just a little bit, what's happening, Ladero, is in the age of social media, the prevailing, and you're right, narrative is a negative one, unfortunately, right?
Okay.
There's so much bad that's there, right? There's so much but thankfully, one of the things I'm really grateful for over the last decade plus is that I get to do the work on the ground. Some of it, obviously, social media, you put out different content and everything, but I just got off the phone a half hour ago with a Black pastor in in Atlanta, who saw some of our work, a couple of things on TBN and everything, and reached out and said, hey, what you're doing, please, could you come? I get those calls all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I talk to Black and Jewish leaders across the country, LA, Chicago, Baltimore, and that synergy is still there. The problem is that twofold. Number one, social media becomes the dominant narrative. And then number two, because of that, the negative voices, some of the anti-Semitic voices in the Black community, they take all the oxygen in the room, right? So someone will get up, and I won't even get into the controversy of it, but certain ones will get up and say some very, very bad things about Israel and Jews and everything. That gets replayed and everything, and then you pan the crowd and you see all these different people, and it gives the impression that that person is speaking for the majority of the Black community when he or she is not. It's just the problem is that, to your other point, since particularly the 70s, the last time there was true organized efforts of real support for Israel in the Black community would have been an organization that inspired me, BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee, which was founded in 1975 by Dr. King's friends and family, Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, Coretta Scott King, Dr. King Sr. These people are part of this huge organization of Black Americans who are standing both to support Israel and also pushing back against the Zionism as racism lie. That was something when I found I was very proud of in terms of African-American heritage. The problem is that on an organized level, that doesn't really exist anymore, which is one of the reasons why we started our organization, to really uncover, not to rediscover the Black Jewish synergy, but to uncover, right? To let people know, no, it is happening. Here's where it's happening. Yeah. Here's what's actually going on, to push back on that, as you so clearly stated, Ladera, which is that negative narrative, because that's all that's actually being spoken at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I guess with that said, do you think that a lot of the anti-Semitism, or I guess the miseducation as far as between the Blacks and Jews, do you think that is coming mostly from the Black communities?
So now you asked a somewhat controversial question, so I'll make it as controversial as I can. Okay. You have, it's funny, I'm working on an article that's part of our Substack. People can go to IBSI.org, and we have a Substack that's called Africa Israel Weekly.
Amazing.
And the next article that's coming out, I can't remember the title exactly. It says how progressive anti-Zionism has exploited the Black community. Now, I'm not trying to be controversial. I just want to answer your question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is no more organic to the Black community than anything else. In other words, how do I say this? And I'll say this, I'll explain. I say this in my book, I'll say in the article. Just like no other people are monolith, right? And all Jews don't think alike and talk alike, and everybody has their own mind, right? There's some overarching things that may be true, right? I love the way the Nigerian author says. She says the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. In other words, stereotypes come from something, right? It's just that everybody doesn't always fit that thing, right?
Great.
Yeah.
What I mean by that, Dr. King explained this when they were seeing in the late 60s the type of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism that you and I are discussing now. It was fringe. It was the younger ones. So the younger lions of the civil rights movement, the Eldridge Cleavers of the Black Panthers, the Angela Davises, right? Those people who were in their late teens, early 20s, they were beginning to spout off Jew hatred. And the reason why it was so significant was because no one had ever heard it before. They knew what Jew hatred was, but that was the white supremacists, that was the Klan, that was the Nazis, right? Yeah. You didn't really see Black folks talking that anti-Jewish stuff. So it was a newer thing. What was new was it was being infused. It was coming from the PLO. Yeah. It was coming from the Soviet Union. Is actually the KGB. They invented the PLO. Now people may be tripping that we have all the receipts, as the young folks would say, right? It was actually, the whole concept was started by the KGB. Yasser Arafat was born and raised in Cairo, Egypt. He's not even from the Levant, right? So he actually takes the reins of this organization again. And what is his agenda? The Black community. You Google his name, you'll see him with pictures with all kind of Black leaders 24/7. Why? Because he's using our moral capital to condemn the only democracy in the Middle East, and he kept beating that like a drum. And the problem with propaganda is you keep saying it over and over and over again, it becomes true. So by now in the 2023, there are younger Black folks who think their birthright is anti-Zionism. They don't know that stuff was imported from the 60s. They just think it's new and hip. Dude, they ain't new and hip. Nothing new about that. Amalek, right? That's all that actually is. The difference is that now you find it in academia. You find it in certain political circles.
Mhm.
Here's
Facts,
the
yeah.
thing, though. The root of it, or I should say the main thrust of it, and we teach this in our organization as well, it's not so much the Black community. It's there, don't get me wrong. But if you notice, I don't have to tell you all, anti-Semitism is up in the West, period. Up in the United States, not just in the Black community, but just
Right.
in general, right?
Sure,
Mhm.
sure.
I've said this many, many times. People probably heard me. The greatest incubator of that type of Jew hatred is not the Nation of Islam. It's our U.S. college campuses and universities, and not the HBCUs. This is coming from UC Irvine, UC Berkeley, Stanford, New York. And I'm not trying to be whatever, but can I be really real?
Hey, be real.
Be real. Black folks don't control those institutions.
Mm.
White progressives control those institutions. People sometimes get upset, but you know what we try to do? We try to speak truth to power. I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism in the Black community. It's clearly it's there.
Yeah.
But what's churning this out by children, by the thousands coming out? They couldn't find Gaza on a map, but they're going to tell you that Israel's an apartheid state committing genocide against the Palestinians, none of which is true. They're learning this in our colleges and universities. Our state, our nation, you all, just celebrated its first Nakba Day at the state capitol at the time that we should have all been celebrating Israel's 75th anniversary. I'm sorry, but that was not sponsored by Howard University. That was not inspired by the Q Dogs, none of that stuff. This was a completely had nothing to do with the Black community. They'll use the Black community to say we are oppressed like them. But see what I'm saying? They'll use that, but it's not coming from us, right? It's like me speaking for Ladero and Danielle, and they never open their mouths. I'm here to tell you, Ladero and Danielle said blah blah blah. You always say, wait. We didn't tell.
Right.
No, wait, hold on.
Say that.
We didn't say that. They've been doing that to the Black community, especially since the 1960s. That's why it's been so persistent. So that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism that's really swelling up in our nation is because, among many other things, our children are not just in colleges too. We track the curriculum that's happening in K through 12. These kids are learning that Zionism is racism and they should go to BDS conferences and all. They are learning these things in school.
Yeah. And we couldn't agree more. We're actually, hearing about some of that in our community of what's happening now in like the public schools, of what's the curriculum that's trying to be taught. And it's unfortunate. It hurts to see that, these kids at such a young age, especially when kids are so pure, to be learning something of hate when we need to be learning of how do we all coexist, how do we get along, and especially the times that we're in right now. And so I think at the end of the day, it's just it's more education, it's more what you're doing, the causes, and getting more people unified together instead of fighting and being separated and segregated.
We are so committed to that as much as we possibly can be, you all, that in our working with different organizations and kind of interfacing and bringing these things to light, and having these conversations, right? Whether we're in a church, whether in a synagogue, and discussing these things, we talk often in our organization about authentic history, that if people understood what was true, right, then they could more clearly see what was happening at the time. And I'll just use this last point. There are very brave Palestinians who live in Gaza, very brave Palestinians who live in Judea and Samaria area, what's called the West Bank, who themselves are willing to speak out about the oppression that they face, but they live in such danger, right? And this is one of the things we tell our younger students and everything in our organization, that to be a voice for justice, that sometimes you're having to say things that someone else cannot say, right? In Gaza, there are people who are fleeing that region to get in boats and try to make it to the Mediterranean. And these boats are rickety. People are dying. These things are happening. The media doesn't really talk about it. And so we're saying that part of bringing in a healing and understanding and the coming together is sometimes telling the story of other people who cannot tell their own story, or who could tell it, but by threat of death, right? We said we have the freedom to actually speak out. So absolutely, we were saying that if there's going to be peace, if there's going to be our true justice, it has to start with truth. And then from there, it moves on from there. So absolutely, man.
Yeah, beautifully said. I want to take a slight turn, and this is definitely a controversial topic, but I don't want to dive heavy into controversy. I want to have a discussion. I've heard a few videos from you, but very, very It was very mature, very, very loving behind the whole Black Hebrew Israelite movement. And I say that because that particular group of people is part of our journey. You know, like our journey began watching some of those videos, you know, and while we were watching it, we felt anger, we felt the hatred, and because it was just for a quick second, we watched a couple very intriguing stuff, the information, the belief system, their grounding, and the things they believe it spoke to us. We were like, oh my goodness, this is interesting, right? But we didn't feel the love. It was racism. We felt it was totally anti-Semitic, you know. But I feel like what is it that this group, the Black Hebrew Israelites, what is it that they are not getting?
So similar to you all, back in the 90s, when I first discovered the Black Hebrew Israelites, this goes back to the group that's in Dimona that actually was led by several different people, including Ben Ami, that moved there in the late 1960s. So I began to do some research, all these different things, and that I'm different learning. And very similar to what you're saying, Ladero, I first experienced the anger, the frustration, the dispossession, all of that, right? I told my wife to this day, I'm so glad that there wasn't the internet back then. There wasn't YouTube. Because if I had seen some of what these young people are bombarded with now, it may have taken me down a different road altogether, right?
Sure.
So as you already know, you all experiencing that, sometimes we have to experience even all those other negative dark places to come to a place of light, right? That you have to actually, what did David say? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear no evil, right? Sometimes your life takes you through really, really dark shadows, and you have to go through it, right? Because you don't get to dictate how it goes. Sometimes things just happen, right? So in the midst of that, for me, there was, similar to what you're saying, Ladero, there was a little space of time there, right? In which there was some anger, frustration, right? And here's the thing, one of the things that I understood, and especially in retrospect, as I got older and we kind of go into the work that I was doing, it was largely because of what information was withheld, right? So one of the things that this negative, because there's more than one Black Hebrews like group, you know, there's different groups, right? But now obviously we're talking about the more negative kind of anti-Semitic, anti-white, anti-Israel, you know, a lot of anger. They're on the street corners, they cussing folks out, they just all kinds of stuff, right? I just got a call from a pastor last week, just real quick aside. He and I are going to meet later on this week. I believe we missed each other. He has a pastor friend where now some of their strategy, these Black Hebrews, like these brothers, go to the church, turn on the loudspeakers and bump their music, right? And start coming at folks coming out the church.
No, outside the church?
Out the church. See, I've already known for years, some of them, they will go to the church on Sunday and they'll pass out leaflets. Your pastor's a liar. That kind of thing, right? You know, even if you want to have a debate about the scripture, that's not, you know what I'm saying? That's not cool. That's not even respectful, right?
Exactly.
So now my pastor just tell me they're bumping the music, and many of them have their own hip hop that's kind of talks about some of these very negative killing white folks, killing you, right? So they're bumping this music, right? While folks are coming out, right? This is just coming at them, right? So I'm watching all that. So for what I recognize in my journey was that part of my anger was that I was learning stuff for the first time, right? I'm going now to the scriptures. One of the things that I know you already know in your journey, in terms of even your spiritual journey now, that too often, and I tell pastors this, we have these honest conversations because we talk about Black Hebrewites, Israelites and everything. I said, you know what, you all, we have to take our responsibility because we don't teach Tanakh, because we don't teach Old Testament. If the first time they hear the book of Joel is on the street corner, that's not the street corner brothers' fault. That's our fault. If the first time they crack open the book of Zephaniah, that's not their fault. That's our fault. If we are supposed to be shepherding and teaching the word of God, but we only spend our time in the epistles and the gospels, and I get that as pastors, we're preaching the New Testament. I get that. But if we're not going to actually deal with the Torah, we're not going to deal with the prophets, we can't be surprised when someone else, like a Black Hebrew Israelite with a very negative agenda, takes those same scriptures, twists them around, and makes it anti-white, anti-Israel. That's part of it for me. Part of what happened for me, Ladero and Danielle, is that I understood that some of my anger was because I'm seeing some things. Again, as much as I loved reading the Old Testament, I'm seeing some things pointed out to me where Africa's concerned. where African Jews are concerned,
Yeah.
if I only understand Jew as the picture of a Nordic looking Jesus in a or Jerry Seinfeld or Barbara Streisand, and then you point me to the Bible and say from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, you've just blown my mind. And depending on what emotional state I'm in, you can make me angry enough, right, to go straight Nation of Islam, but just with a Hebrew twist. And that's what's happening now. None of these young brothers have never heard or seen these things before. And now someone is taking what's true and then taking also their own agenda and saying, therefore, they're the fake ones, we're the real ones. Okay, if everything else you said to me was true, and now when you start to treat a racially divisive scripture, I must believe that too, because everything else you said I didn't know, so they must have stolen my birthright. So for me, that's where my heart comes from. I'll tell the truth, but there's a heart that goes out to them because I also recognize how many of them have been deceived, the way that it actually happened, and it allows me to sometimes engage and kind of share more truth with them in that way. I hope that made sense.
No, it makes
100%.
total sense. You know, my wife mentioned coexisting. You know, obviously not like the whole world at this point is not gonna believe all the same thing. Everybody has their own spiritual journeys, right? But so understanding that, the reality is we have to learn how to coexist somehow. How, right? Because the route that the world is taking right now with this division and this segregation, it's not working. Right, our next generation is being affected. Our children are being affected. Right, we have to be very mindful on which on what our kids are watching, what schools. Right, it's a crazy thing to have to really be mindful of the schools that we put in our kids in, because of the danger of certain curriculums. You know what I mean? And so we have to really learn how to build these bridges, and that's why when we found that we were going to be interviewing you, we got so pumped because it's a bridge, and it's so beautiful what Aish is doing. Aish is all about creating bridges. You know what I mean? To be able to have this discussion with you, and hopefully, you know, I mean, they have hundreds of thousands, millions of people watching and viewers. You know, we just want people to know that love needs to be our foundation.
One of the things that I appreciate, Ladero, in that example is when it comes to the Jewish state of Israel, you have people from 100 different nations that are there.
Yeah.
It's the Jewish state. It's the only Jewish homeland, but you know, they're Christians there, they're Muslims there, they're Baha'i, though. And as no nation is perfect, right? That's almost silly. We have to say that because of all the propaganda, but obviously no nation is perfect. Israel to be 75 years young. We always say 3,000 years old, 75 years young, right? They're pretty good example of a functional, multi-ethnic, pluralistic society, right? Again, no more perfect than any other place, but look at what this place is. Look at Jews who, when you go to the land, right? They're black, they're white, they're brown, they're Asian, they're Hispanic. I mean, you can see that just the world there in this tiny Israel, right? Not to mention this technology and all things that it does. To me, it is the quintessential example of that coexist. It's the quintessential example of, that's why when Americans come against Israel and point out its flaws, they said, you know what, y'all, we had 300 plus years to get our stuff together and we still can't. So we might want to cut the Jewish state a little bit of slack, right? Because it is in that sense, a nation reborn, receiving Jewish, first of all, the refugees that were coming at the earlier part of Israel, right? But then, of course, people making aliyah from all over the world and serving in the IDF. I mean, doing amazing work. As you know, the IDF, this moral army that actually places itself in harm's way to escort people from Gaza out of the fighting range so they can actually fight the bad people and not mess with, you know, the civilian. You're talking about an example. So when I hear that in terms of whether it's coexistence, when it comes to coming together, Israel is that perfect example, right? Here is a place that has had more than its share of challenges, right? So enemies surrounding on all sides, but still, when you go there, the hospitality, people from all over the world coming, different religions, they come. Even like Isaiah said, right? All the nations, they flow to Zion, right? They come there, and you see it works in a way that's unique to anywhere else in the world.
Beautiful.
Very beautiful. Yeah.
You're a gift to the world, Dumisani. You are a true gift. I mean, I really hope that there are many people watching, but specifically other Christians being able to watch this episode. Again, just everybody, but you're an example especially to the Christian community. You're a beautiful example to, to be able to have this heart and to, create this organization to bringing awareness around all these different beautiful things. And so thank you, because, us being on this journey to Judaism and converting, learning about some of the things that you're teaching, and you having, the background that you have, it means a lot to us, and it teaches us how to even be able to communicate to our family, because our family is they're still strong Christians, which we love dearly. And so it's people like you that teach us a lot on how to be able to communicate and to speak from a place of love.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I appreciate that, you all. I do, and I appreciate. And Danielle, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I'm talking about.
No,
but
please.
what you all are doing, I know, you are sharing a very deep and personal journey, but in a very external way, right? Allowing people to kind of see, and that's a lot of people don't know that's not easy to do. Because it can be invasive. You give folks access, but some folks, they're not very polite, not very nice, so they want to jump in and give their little 2 cents and everything. But
Yes.
you do it because obviously there's even more people that appreciate, can hear, can listen, and even in dialogue and everything too. So I think that is really important. And to your last point, Daryl, I think I think that is that there's such a divisiveness. One of the things that we're concerned with in our nation, obviously, there's such a militant secularism, right?
Yeah.
Against people of faith, whether that be Jews, Christians, Muslim. There's a lot of that, which is not good for anyone, right? That when you're marginalizing people who have faith, even if their faith is not yours, to beat them down and to attack them and everything, all that does is create a lot of darkness for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
So as we know, anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred in the world, as we always say, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews, right? So as anti-Semitism is rising, we see the intolerance for people in general, particularly people of faith. Those things are rising as well. So I tell people all the time, even if you don't think you have a dog in the fight, you're not pro-Israel, anti-Israel, whatever, it behooves you to be aware of the Jew hatred, because history has shown us
Yes.
parts of the sages, when they talk about the fact that when Moses was born, the sages say that the magicians went to Pharaoh and said, the Messiah is born, but we don't know if he's Hebrew or Egyptian. So when Pharaoh said, throw them in the Nile, he didn't just say the Hebrews, it says all the baby boys. So if you were an Egyptian who was silent when the Hebrews were being persecuted, now your baby's being thrown in the Nile as well. And when I've learned that part about the sages, it just struck me that if you were willing to be silent while the Hebrews were being attacked, eventually it came for you too.
Wow.
And this is what we tell the people as well. We're concerned with what we see happen with our Jewish brothers and sisters, because not just because it's them, that's a huge part of it, but because it forecasts what's coming for humanity, right? And so people as Dr. King would say, people of conscience need to make sure that they're raising their voices and everything.
Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, it has been such a pleasure. We can talk for hours.
I know.
So thank you so much for your time. But before we do end, I would love for people to find out, how can they support you, what you have going on, and if you can just share, like, maybe some of your social platforms or books or anything, how they can, find you and stay in communication as far as what's going on with you.
Absolutely.
And your
The easiest way to do it and the quickest way is go to our website, IBSI.org, which stands for Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, IBSI.org. Our social media platforms are there on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I believe, and our YouTube page as well. And then also, if they want to join our newsletter, that's there as well. You just scroll on there. So we just revamped our website, so it made it a little bit more accessible to everybody. Videos are there, and also about our peace initiative. If people want to know more about some of the activities that we do, our peace initiative is one of our main. It's not the only thing; it's one of our main things where we have recruited Black young men and women from across the country. We did a 9-month journey in which every month we come together. We have these types of conversations. We study, we drill down. And we take 2 trips. December is the motherland and June is the Holy Land. We were in South Africa in December. We'll be in Israel and from June the 5th through the 15th. So if people want to know more about that, of course, we're also a nonprofit. So if they feel they want to give something to it, they can do that as well and write it off. IBSI.org will kind of give you all that information.
Beautiful. And so we'll make sure that we put all of Dumisani's platform, his social platforms, everything that he has going on down in the description below. Again, thank you for your time. You are a gift. And you have been a blessing to us. And I believe hopefully everybody that's watching. So thank you so much, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Daryl and Danielle. I really appreciate it, and blessings on you all.
Thank you very much. Another one in the books.
Yes, another phenomenal podcast. I mean, again, we learn so much on these podcasts when connecting to these incredible guests that we have on, and it was just such an honor just to be able to hear his story and to hear what he is doing, not only for the people of Christian faith, but how he's helping the Christians and Jews coexist together in such a beautiful way.
It's a very beautiful thing to be able to hear and witness what he's doing. And I felt his heart, I felt his sincerity, and he truly wants to help. Right? He wants to bring peace, and that's what we've been all about. So that's why we were so pumped when we found out that we're going to be interviewing him. And because I think conversations like this need to happen more frequently. And just dialogue, very, very healthy discussions on how we can just bring the world closer and closer to, I believe, what the goal of humanity is relationship with the creative universe, and that can't happen when we don't know how to coexist, and when we don't know how to connect with each other and have communication and have healthy discussions with one another. And so it was just very, very elevating for us, for sure.
Absolutely.
If you are enjoying these episodes, please consider subscribing to Aish's YouTube channel. Also on the Apple Podcast as well. Be sure to subscribe there, rank it, and give a like, give a thumbs up, and leave a comment below. We would love to hear your thoughts and your comments, your ideas, whatever you got from listening to today's episode. Please be sure to share.
Yes. And you can also find us at House of Lev on all the platforms as well, on YouTube, on Instagram. It's just House of Lev across the board.
Thank you guys so much for your time, and we'll see you on the next episode.